Hello everybody. Today we'll be going over scope in Python. So scope is the idea that a variable, you can only access a variable in the same area that you initialized that variable. So generally their variables can be classified in two ways, local or global. So local variables are variables that are defined in things like functions. So right here, you can make a variable on, let's give a value of 25, and let's print it out. So we can call our function, and this will run perfectly well because we are accessing our variable from within our function. Now, if we tried to access our variable from outside this function, like on line 6, it'll give us an error because it doesn't know what x is, because x is defined within the local scope of my function. Now, one thing that might be a little bit confusing is that if you actually define a function within another function, like I'll call here, I'll make another function go, and this will print out x. And then let's say I make a call to go also inside my function. And then globally, I call my function. This will give me 25 because go is defined in the same scope as x. And so it can access it. So essentially what I could do is just remove this like this, and it'll run the exact same way. So if you have functions, if you have functions within other functions, you can still access the local variables of the parent function. Now, global variables are just variables that you define outside of any function. So I'll call this g, and I'll make this 100. Now this variable can also be accessed inside this child function. And as you can see, we can print g here. We can also just print g inside my function. And this will run before go. Since it's global, you can also access it globally and print g at the end. So global variables are available globally as well as locally inside functions or classes. Now, one thing that you can run into, which might be a little bit tricky, is let's say I have a global variable g, but then I define a g locally inside my function. And let's not print this down here. So these variables both have the same name, except g will only be 25 inside the local scope of my function. So if we print it globally, it still is 100. So it doesn't change even if you define another variable within a function. I can even make this a string. Just say hello, and it'll be hello. But globally, so locally, on line 5, where it's printed inside the function, it is hello. But globally, it is still 100 because that's how we defined it. So if you're ever in a situation where you need to define a variable inside a function, but you want it to be global, you can use the global keyword. So we can say global G, and we'll say G equals hello. And then outside of our function, we can print G. So here, it works perfectly fine. But if we did not have this global G, which signals that the variable is a global variable and not a local variable inside the function, we'll get an error. So this global keyword signals that it is a global variable. So if we go back to the situation where we had a variable defined globally, and then right here we redefined another variable with the same name, and it didn't change. But if we use the global keyword, it will change. So this global keyword will now refer to this G. So you'll actually be referring to the value hello instead of the value 100. So that's why right here, when we print out G outside of the function, completely unrelated to the function, but we've called the function before, it'll change the global variable. Now, if we don't call this function, the variable will still be 100 as we assigned it at the start. Because if we're not running this function, then the global variable G is not being modified. However, if we do make a call to the function, then it will modify the variable. So yeah, that's the basics of scope in Python.